Good afternoon, everyone. We will get started here in a moment. All right. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the TD SYNNEX Public Sector Spotlight Series. We're thrilled to have you here as we dive into the education sector and how technology is playing a pivotal role in shaping the learning experience. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from Will Reed, our Director of Business Development with the Education Program here at TD SYNNEX. Will, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Felicia. I appreciate that. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Will Reed. As Felicia said, I'm the Director of Public Sector Education. I manage the K-12, higher ed, and E-rate. So if it has anything to do with education, in some way, somehow, I'm involved. Today, we want to kind of talk a little bit about how we turn the challenges facing K-12 into opportunities. We have a lot of challenges right now in K-12. And recently, there's been even possibly some added challenges to that. So it's one of those things where there's definitely the challenges definitely exist, but there's also a lot of opportunity there to kind of really be that strategic partner for that end user. So let me jump right in here. Well, all right, here we go. Sorry. So again, I've been with TD SYNNEX now for about 5 years. I came over from the end user side. I spent 10 years as an IT director in higher ed, from there I went into K-12 and I was the chief technology officer for K-12 for the next 10 years. Came out to Greenville actually back when it was just SYNNEX and um, you know, d brought my team out. We looked at a lot of the products and solutions SYNNEX had to offer, and then they, got back in touch with me a little bit later and said, "Hey, how would you like to come run our education program?" So that's kind of how I got involved in this space and distribution, and have been doing it, for the last 5 years. So um, it's very interesting and intriguing to be able to see this from all sides. Coming from the end user side where I was a major decision maker and I got to see how people purchased or I got to see how uh, resellers or service providers, sold to me, how they worked, how distribution worked from that perspective. Then coming over here to this side of distribution where I get to see how resellers work in the background and how they're selling to the end user now. We have a pretty big focus. Our education program is really, really large. It's our largest vertical here at TD SYNNEX. So when it comes to education, it is a very, very, very massive space. And I would split it up, probably say it's probably 65 to 70% K-12, probably 35 to 30%, 30 to 35% higher ed. One of the biggest reasons for that is simple. In K-12, you provide a device to the student. And because you provide a device to an underage student, they have to protect that student from every angle. So it's one of those things where there's a lot more opportunity to sell a bunch of add-ons in K-12, whereas in higher ed, it's a little bit different market, right? Whereas K-12 buys from a district perspective, higher ed tends to have three different routes of purchase, right? You've got the university system that may buy, a large cybersecurity solution or network and infrastructure solution. Then you have the colleges that have their own budgets, and then you break that down even to the schools within the colleges that have their own IT budget. So it's a much different space than higher ed. And K-12 operates off of so much federal funding and state level funding. That it's just a different world. So for us, our big areas of focus from a K-12 perspective right now is cybersecurity. We know that when it comes to cybersecurity, student data privacy plays a big role in that. We know that when it comes to the kids, they're not like us, right? They don't have apps where they can just jump right in and say, "Hey, did someone open an account in my name?" or get an alert when someone does. So the schools have a responsibility to really kind of protect those students and ensure that they don't graduate high school with two cars and a mortgage they weren't even aware of. And then you kind of get into network and infrastructure. When we talk about network and infrastructure, it's kind of like the interstate, right? And I'm sure everyone has one in their hometown, and they work and work and they build and they build, and then by the time they get it finished, it's always too small. And that's the network in school districts these days, right? Ever since COVID, they put in one-to-ones across the board. When you put in a one-to-one, the demand for technology just grows exponentially because now the teachers have access to it and they're used to using it and like using it, and the students use it, and the parents are used to using it, and the administrators are used to having it. So everybody just wants more and more and more. So those networks are always under strain no matter what. They're just constantly in that place. Of course, cloud and IoT, artificial intelligence is starting to kind of catch hold a little bit. They're still a little leery of it, but it's starting to catch hold a little bit. Campus security, unfortunately, that's something we wish we didn't have to spend money on from a school district perspective, but we also are pretty sure that's probably not going away anytime soon. So it's become a real issue, and there are a lot of technology solutions to kind of you know, help drive that protection and give schools as much um, insight and view of what's going on as possible. Then, of course, we talk about the future of classroom. When we talk about the classroom and technology and all the technology being spent, that future continues to kind of adjust and change as we go. E-rate. E-rate's obviously a big deal. It's a $4.6 billion program every year. And then, of course, now they just launched a new cybersecurity pilot program that's also a part of that. So it's really become a really big forerunner there, and we expect to see them absolutely, hopefully, throw a little bit more money at that in the coming years as they see the success of the E-rate program. A quick fact on the E-rate program, when it comes to the cybersecurity pilot program, there were 2,700 applicants into that program. Only 707 were selected to move forward and participate in the program. It's a $200 million 3-year program, but there were 3.7 billion with a B dollars that was the demand for the program. 2,700 applicants asked for $3.7 billion. So that's a really big demand. So that tells you how um, how important cybersecurity is in the K-12 education and how badly the end user thinks it's important. And then, of course, student data privacy. We talked about that a few minutes ago. It goes hand in hand with cybersecurity. If you don't have good cybersecurity, you're not going to have student data privacy at all. And they've passed about 150 laws in the last few years, and they continue to introduce about 30 laws a year tapped onto student data privacy. So it's getting to the point where, if your solution and your product doesn't ensure the privacy of the student data, then, it's out, right? They replace it with something else. Our growth strategy, we have Destination AI, we have Public Sector Empowerment Program. In our program, we have practice builders, training and enablement services, do a lot of training on everything from, E-rate training and overview to how to think like a customer, right? Where I talk about what it was like to be an end user and what I was looking for from a reseller community and what I was thinking about if you were bringing me a solution, things like that. Um, Individual review and assessment of contract solution and pricing. Our resources, we have our E-rate resource center now available and open, funding and grants, of course, procurement contracts, our DAP Diversity Alliance program, our market intelligence that we offer, vendor management, demand gen, and even things like cyber range that really kind of add a whole new element to your practice. So those are just some things about what we can offer, what we do, and what we're focused on. So when we look at state and local government, it really is an industry of industries, and you all may have seen this slide before, but I always think it's really important to realize there may only be 50 states, but 19,519 cities, right? 3,031 counties, 16,160 townships, 12,880 independent school districts. And that's not even counting the charter schools and the private schools, right? And then 2,090 public higher ed institutions. There is a big, big market out there when it comes to education. It is a big, big, big market. And the thing about K-12 students are they're not going to let them fail, right? They're always going to throw money at it um, to keep that afloat no matter what, because that is our future. So when we look at TD SYNNEX education pillars, we break our pillars down into three big pillars, right? Network and infrastructure. Think of everything on the backside, right? And I won't read all of those for the sake of time, but cybersecurity, server storage, network and infrastructure, backup and recovery, cloud, all of those things kind of fall into that space. And then we look at the facilities pillars, and that's everything that goes in the building, but not the classroom, right? That could be campus solutions, that could be um, security cameras, campus security, building access control. I mean, even transportation, bus Wi-Fi, things like that would fall into that category, right? Energy management, digital signage, wayfinding, all of those kind of pieces fall into that facility section there. And then, of course, last but not least, we have the classroom solutions, right? And when we talk about the classroom solutions, we're talking about any technology that's used inside that classroom space. So, student and staff devices, device management, collaboration solutions, interactive panels, VR, AR, esports, STEM, STEAM, even right down to classroom furniture, right? We have just about anything and everything you can think of that fits inside that classroom level because that's where the teaching and learning takes place is in that space. And that's why we break that pillar completely off separately from facilities. Something for facilities may be, something that could even help parents that come through the building when they're doing tours or at sporting events, right? But that classroom solutions, those are absolutely 100% teaching and learning based, if that makes sense. So when it comes to the challenges, when we talk about overcoming those challenges, right? The challenges that schools are facing post-COVID and even now, honestly, with the change in leadership, we're still a little, we're still a little lost there, trying to figure out what's going to happen, right? But if you remember, we had the ESSER funds, the COVID relief funds. We had the American Rescue Plan, and we had all of those programs that pumped a ton of money into K-12, right? They were all designed to get kids the learning, the tools and technology they needed to learn from home and remote learning. And then it was all about bringing them back safely, back into the school environment and getting them back on track there. And there was a ton of it. It was $151 billion pumped into that, right? That was a lot. Never in the history of K-12 have they seen that kind of money pumped into their programs, right? And probably there may never be again, right? So, I like to always use this analogy. When it came to ESSER funds, they had so much money they didn't even know what to do with everything. And I like to use this analogy as kind of a joke. If I gave each one of you $10 million dollars and I say, look, buy anything you want, basically, and you have 3 years to spend it. But whatever you don't spend in 3 years, I'm going to come back and I'm going to take what's left over, right? The first year, you're going to spend pretty frivolously, right? That's what schools did. I mean, I know I would, right? I've always wanted a Lamborghini, but the reality is, after having one, I'd probably realize I'm way too big for it. I might need an Escalade or something different. But that first year, they spent so frivolously. They bought anything and everything they thought they could need and bought anything they could get their hands on from supply chain issues that they thought would help with teaching and learning with remote learning, right? The second year, they still spent pretty frivolously, really. They said, well, this didn't work, but we think this will, right? So they still had a ton of money. Matter of fact, the second round was even larger. So they said, hey, we can do something with this, right? And so they started buying and they still bought pretty frivolously. They may have pushed out the first round, but the second round they were still spending a lot. Then finally they got to that third year, right? And that money dried up in September of this last year of 2024. That last year, what they were looking for is one, what can we buy that's going to add value? What can we consolidate? And where can we spend our money the wisest so that it's maintainable and sustainable, right? Just like us, right? You get to that third year of that $10 million dollars I was giving you, you're going to say, what's going to add quality to my life and what can I sustain moving forward, right? Because I'm going to feel pretty broke after I lose all that money. That's where schools were, right? Right now, they're kind of in a place where it's like, ooh, we lost all that money. We're kind of coming off all that money, and we're having to try to find that balance again, right? It's almost like losing your good paying job and having to take a lower paying job. You find that balance, you get back into spending, but it takes you just a little bit to kind of level set, if that makes sense. So the ESSER funds really, really, really kind of put a damper on some of that and kind of, for a lack of a better term, put them in a place where they weren't for sure how to move forward, right? Then you have declining enrollment in a lot of the schools. When you talk about K-12, there's a lot of declining enrollment because there's a lot of reasons for it. There's political reasons for it. There's safety issues for it. There's a lot of different reasons for it. But at the end of the day, there were a lot of people who said, "Hey, we like our kids going remote. We want our kids to be able to go to a virtual school." Some of them said, "We don't want our kids in there because of safety." Some of them said because of political issues that they felt were being pushed in schools. Either way, they lost a lot of enrollment. That's been a massive challenge for schools. In a lot of cases, the declining enrollment actually just moved, right? It just moved. It was like that old book, Who Moved My Cheese? It literally was that during the pandemic, a lot of parents could say, "Hey, the interest rates are so low, I can go buy a house out in the suburbs in a better school district, in a smaller school district, and keep the same payment I have now." Right. So they moved to a different district. So a lot of other districts gained while the large districts lost. But either way, declining enrollment has been a massive challenge for schools. Teacher shortages. There's a lot of reason for those, right? Some of it was because during the pandemic they said, "I don't like this. I don't like teaching like this." So they left. A lot of them left because private companies hired them on and said, "Hey, we can pay you better to come over here and help us sell our product," right? So some left for that reason. But at the end of the day, teacher shortages has really, really kind of created this deficit for schools. It's been a massive, massive challenge. Staff shortages due to lack of funding. You know, when you have declining enrollment, you lose tax dollars, right? You can't keep funding everyone. If you look at Fort Worth ISD or Austin ISD, they're a classic example of this. I think Austin's $110 million in the hole right now. They have a $110 million deficit right now, right? Um, they lost a lot of money. A lot of the kids moved out of Austin proper and moved into the suburbs, right? Fort Worth, same thing. So those staff shortages due to lack of funding have created a lot of challenges. How do we teach the kids? And it's not just teaching. What about what about losing our staff, right? Our IT staff. They got hired away during the pandemic. We can't afford to pay them any more money. We can't afford to give them raises. We don't have enough to take care of all the resources, that we have right now that we're working on, right? There's a lot of challenges there. Federal funds right now are in question, right? We don't know what that's going to look like quite yet. We know the current administration says we're going to do away with the Department of Education and we're going to give that money to the states. What schools are thinking right now, I'll just be honest with you, they're saying, great, we might get the money given to the state, but are they going to cut 30%? Are they going to give it a 30% haircut before they turn it over to the states, right? What are we going to lose out of this that we've been using, right? It's a complete reallocation of funding. So that kind of puts them in a place where they're kind of going, okay, wait a minute, what are we going to lose here, right? So they're kind of sitting back right now, looking at all that, kind of still trying to decide how they move forward from there. And then, of course, massive inflation, right? Just like you and I would go to the grocery store, it costs more. For them, everything they buy costs more. And with tariffs, could cost even more yet, right? So it's one of those things where there's a lot of challenges facing the schools. It's not that we can't overcome it because we can, but it's important to know what they're facing right now to know how to help them. So how do we overcome some of the challenges, right? There's a few ways we can do this. Consolidation of technology. Schools are going to look for as many one-stop shops as possible, right? They're going to be looking to say, how do we take all this technology we have now and create this this interoperability, if you will, right? How do we consolidate some of this technology, make it a little cheaper to maintain and sustain, but but more manageable, right? That's going to be one thing they're looking to do. Outsourcing to trusted partners, right? I was just talking to a vendor this morning, as a matter of fact, but there's probably never been a more opportune time to sell something as a service. Okay. Um, Again, schools lost a lot of their technology resources. And during the pandemic, they weren't able to use that money to hire technology resources. They could hire teachers, they could hire counselors. They couldn't hire IT staff, and they brought on all these devices and all this new technology, and they're trying to support all this. And then now they're cutting staff 20%, right? So how do we support everything we have? Well, we outsource that. That's what I'd be doing if I were in the same position I was in. How do I outsource this to a trusted partner that can take care of some of this for me where I don't have to worry about it, right? What can you take off of their plates? Ed tech as a service. This is something we're working on really hard here at TD SYNNEX, okay? But being able to provide this ed tech as a service, what can you offer as a service? Cybersecurity as a service? That'd be great, right? A lot of schools don't understand cybersecurity completely, and they certainly can't afford to pay a cyber person to come work for them unless they're a really large district. The reality is that it'll cost more than they can pay, um, and if they could pay them, they'll be hired away probably in the next 6 months or a year, right? So at the end of the day, being able to offer cybersecurity as a service to a school allows the school to say, hey, you know what? I don't have to worry about that. I know that there's not as much forgiveness in this anymore. Parents aren't as forgiving, especially if it breaks into student data privacy, right? Superintendents, school boards, nobody turns a blind eye anymore when the school gets hacked. It's big deal, and a lot of times heads roll with it now. So if they can outsource that to a partner and a partner can help with that, that's a big deal, right? That's a big weight lifted off of their shoulders. It doesn't have to stop at cybersecurity as a service. It could go on to device as a service, right? There's a lot of larger school districts, a couple in Florida, as a matter of fact, that have said, look, we don't want to repair the devices anymore. We don't have to deal with the devices. We want somebody else to manage all that for us. We want somebody else to manage all of it, right? You could offer ed tech as a service to them where you rotate that stuff out every 4 years. You manage the device repairs, you manage everything for them, right? And there are schools who want it because they don't want to deal with it anymore, right? It's again, it all comes down to the resources that they have on hand. In the past, schools have been very, very territorial. And believe me, I know this because I was one of them. Okay. They're very territorial. For them, when it comes to working with the reseller, they wanted to hold on to everything. They wanted to own everything. And now they finally gotten to a point where it's like, okay, we just can't do it anymore. We're going to have help. And they're going to go to their most trusted partners for that help. And then, of course, network as a service, right? We're already starting to see some of that with E-rate, where some of the smaller schools are saying, look, our IT coordinator, not even a director, right? Our IT coordinator doubles as our media specialist. And he or she doesn't really even understand the network that much. And if we can pay for this as a service and we don't have to touch it and we can get the proper SLAs set up, then let's do it, right? So EdTech as a service can be a big play, and TD SYNNEX Capital can help you with that because they're making a big play on that too, where they can help a school push that out. They can finance it for the school, and the school they can let this, if the school can't do it in a year or 2 years, it's okay. They'll work with the school to let it go, right? They can be very, very creative with that. But the great thing as a reseller, you get paid up front. So it's done and over with for you, right? Um, Another way to overcome some of the challenges is going to be schools shifting these large expenditures from capital to operating budgets, like device refreshes, right? This is going to be a big year for device. This year and next year actually will be a large year for device refreshes. This is that 4 year mark from when the first set of funding came out. All those devices are up for refresh. Then, if you all remember, it took another year and a half for most schools to get devices. So that second set will be next year, right? But being able to roll that into that device as a service where, look, maybe you do incremental refreshes, right, with the school. Maybe you're only replacing a certain percentage of them each year, right, instead of replacing everything at one time. How can you use TD SYNNEX Capital to offer them a good creative financial package to really help them out with that, right? There's a lot of ways to do that, but they're looking to shift a lot of those expenditures that they use for capital. Capital money in schools were always designed to be used for tenure and longer projects. Really new buildings and building renovations and things like that, right? It was never made to be used every 4 years for devices. And so it's really hard to pull that out of the hat every 4 years. So that's why they're moving away from capital budgets now and that. Staggered purchase is another way that they can use to replace some of their devices or their network, things like that. And then, of course, last but not least, a concentration of core technology solutions, right? And what those that core of technology solutions look like is this, okay? These days, the device sits in the center. It's the one thing, I hate the term device. I hate using it. It's like a commodity, right? But at the end of the day, it is the one way that they communicate with students. When the student's at home, if they have to have a utility outage or a flu outbreak, which is still happening all the time, COVID outbreak or inclement weather, right? They just tell the kids, hey, everybody stay at home. It's safer than getting the buses out. Let's just keep everybody at home and let them learn remotely, right? But the only way they can do that is if the student has a device. So that device has really become that, you know, piece of communication, back and forth from the student to the teacher. So but to have a successful one-to-one, there are these core technology solutions necessary, right? And one of those is that on-campus connectivity, right? We talked about that a little earlier about how when it comes to network, it's always struggling. It's always behind, no matter what. It's constantly playing catch up. Off-campus connectivity has become a big deal now, right? How do we get these kids the network off campus, the ones who don't have it, right? E-rate even came out as part of their learning without limits with the new hotspot checkout, right? Where kids could take these devices home and connect that way. Um, Cybersecurity and student data privacy. They go hand in hand. I don't even need to go back into how big cybersecurity is there, but there's a $200 million pilot program. The fact that it's a $200 million pilot program and there was a $3.7 billion demand for it tells you everything you need to know. It tells you that it's setting a new status quo for schools, right? Now, now they need cybersecurity. And if E-Rate's going to pay $200 million for some of these schools, the 707 schools that were accepted, other schools are going to have to start saying we're going to have to allocate some more funds to this. We're going to have to spend some more money. The status quo has been raised. Everybody's watching now. There'll be less forgiveness here. So they're going to spend more money on cybersecurity. Backup and recovery, because it's not if, it's when, right? Cloud, IoT, those are all big factors. Accessories, all those devices and all these pieces of technology require accessories, as we know. Collaborative AV solutions. We thought that maybe these AV solutions like interactive panels and things like that, that after the pandemic that they might not renew all that, but it turns out they are renewing it all, right? It's another piece of that core technology solution that they really, really do need. And then, of course, campus security. Again, unfortunately, we have to worry about it, but it's not just physical security, it's also student monitoring from a socio-emotional perspective. So yes, you have campus security, and campus security plays that big role in physical security and monitoring and knowing what's going on the campus, um, having those big command centers where they can monitor everything at all times, but also down to the student. There's products like Lightspeed Alert and things like that that monitor what the student's looking for on the device, what they're accessing. So, I can tell you from experience, I've seen it too many times. Children might look for how do I kill myself and not make it hurt, right? There's a lot of those kinds of things that the students look for because they're young and they're not mature yet and they're looking for all kinds of stuff like that, right? There's software solutions that tie into the devices that allow the district to see when a student searches something like that. It's going to alert the district administrators, right? That can alert law enforcement and the parents and let them know what's going on. So campus security goes beyond just securing the campus physically, but also socially and emotionally as well, right? And then, of course, artificial intelligence. When it comes to artificial intelligence, it's one of those things that, schools are taking a very slow approach to this. They're not going to just jump right into this right away, but they're being forced to use it because they have to for to be able to teach the kids and prepare the kids. So that's one side. They're using it for things like energy management, tracking buses and the routes that buses are on. They're using it for a lot of things from that perspective. Maintenance, to be maintenance schedules to see, when a product or when a specific, machine or whether it be bus maintenance or whether it be AC units or whatever, when it might need parts, when it needs services, and based on how long it's run, when it might need a new part, right? So they can get ahead of it. So there's a lot of ways intelligence can be used way outside the classroom, right? Within the financial means of the school, within transportation and food services and operations and IT and all over the place. But those are Those are those core technology solutions. It doesn't mean that they're not going to buy anything else, but it means that these are the pieces that they're going to really be looking at really, really closely over the next 2 or 3 years to make sure they have everything grounded where they need it grounded so they can be successful. If all the other stuff falls off, it's not a big deal. They can still continue their teaching and learning mission, if that makes sense. So what happens now, right? We talked about the funding, we talked about where that was. So where does that leave us? Okay. Well, it leaves us back to the traditional funding streams. When all the ESSER money's gone, when all that's out, it leaves us back to the traditional funding streams. You're going to have state funding still going to come in, right? You're going to have federal funding. We don't know if it's going to take a haircut or not. That's what schools are worried about. They're a little bit worried about, hey, if we get that money, if the federal government turns that over to the states, where does that leave us? Is that gonna, are they gonna take some money away from that first, or what are they gonna do, right? And in schools, I'll just tell you right now, when it comes to schools, they get very creative how they use all those different funds, right, for different things. Um, there could be some advantages to it, right? There could be some major advantages to it too, right? When you look at federal funding, such as title funds and things like that. Some of that technology had to stay in school for 5 years, and it had to stay in that particular school for 5 years. And there may be some changes to that coming out, right? Where suddenly they're able to upgrade or update some of that equipment faster. So there could be advantages to it as well. Grants, a lot of schools operate on grants. That's a big, big thing for schools. So, one thing I want to mention there is our grant station, right? Lisa Rourke runs our grant station, and that's an area of opportunity. It's painful sometimes to dig through grants and see if there's anything available and have to go to the school and see if they're interested in it, right? But occasionally it's going to work. And when it does, it can be big. And we have a partnership with the American Grant Writers Association where they can assign a grant writer to that particular grant for that specific vertical that has experience in that vertical that can help write that grant. So again, that's another funding stream. Obviously, the property taxes, E-rate, it's estimated to be $4.94 billion this next year, right? This is the last year of the E-rate cycle. Next year starts all over again. Everybody gets their money back, right? So it's going to be a big year. And then, of course, any special funding they get, right? Whether that be community money, get that may be, some kind of CET money or CTE money, things like that. So they're back to the traditional funding streams. And the key to the traditional funding streams is just understanding the buying cycle, right? It's really, really important to understand the buying cycle for education because if you don't understand the buying cycle for education, it's almost impossible to be successful, right? Almost completely impossible to be successful. They operate on a very specific buying cycle each and every year. And the majority of schools run on a July 1st to June 30th fiscal year. There are some schools that don't. There's a few states that don't, but by far and wide, the majority do, right? Regardless, this is going to work similarly. The dates may just be slung a little differently, but by far, 90% of schools run on a July 1st to June 30th fiscal year. So this slide depicts what the school district is doing during each quarter of the year. Okay. So again, starting with that July 1st to September, that Q1, right? That's going to be a time for new budgets for schools, right? They're getting their money. They're starting to think about their projects, what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, right? Um, and it's also kind of a final prep for the school year. July is when the majority of the teachers are going to come back, and they're going to be back for a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks before they bring the students back. Q1 is that period where this is kind of that last minute, the master schedules come out. This school got 10 extra students. The school dropped 10 extra. This one over here gained 100 extra students, right? They're trying to figure out where they need to be, and they're kind of triaging everything on the fly to some degree, just because literally this is hitting them as the master schedule comes out. The teachers are coming back saying, hey, I need this. Hey, I need that. This teacher got moved from here to there, but maybe some of their technology was left in the old building. And so there's a lot of chaos during this time period from July 1st to September. And while they have their new budgets, they're not spending an ounce of their new budget from July to September. They're not going to start spending that till September because generally speaking, they won't even open that budget until September for them. They'll tell them what they have, they'll allocate it, but they will not spend during that July and August timeframe. So then you move into Q2. As you get into Q2, districts start to really kind of plan for the buying cycle, right, in the next year. That's when the board admin begins next year's budget. They start talking about, what they think they'll need. But this is a time Q are really starting to kind of think about their bigger projects, right? They're going to wait around till the end of the year to buy those bigger projects, right? But at the end of the day, they're looking to see, you know, what big projects are going to work on. We need to start investigating and looking into those solutions now. We need to start talking to resellers about it and, trying to narrow it down to the actual product or solution we really want to go with, right? So this is that area where they're really thinking internally heavy and hard. The beginning of the school year is kind of finally slowed down so they can actually do instead of what everybody else needs at this point in time. Then you move into Q3, January to March, right? That's when state legislatures review the next year's budget, schools work to finalize next year's focus area. This is also a time when they're starting to prepare RFPs for big projects or education buying season, right? They're starting to prepare all these RFPs and starting to kind of pull them together and put them together in the way they want so they can go ahead and start posting those RFPs. So this is that time where, if you haven't gotten there yet, you definitely need to be there during this time, right? And then we move into Q4. As we move into Q4, that's the end of fiscal year, right? April through June, we call that education buying season, right? That is absolute buying season. This is use it or lose it. I can't even begin to tell you how many times each year during this time that it might be June the 25th. We've got 5 days left, right? And I'll have people coming out of the woodwork who want to get in. This is that time where you really want to get in and you really do want to look at their technology plans, look at their board minutes or board meetings. This is where they're going to start trying to get approval for a lot of this kind of stuff, right? So just to for it to go out to an RFP even, right? So that this is that time to get in and do that. Q3, demo and answer questions, right? Make recommendations, suggestions, set stage for next cycle. This is where you want to know what kind of purchasing methods are. This is that time when they're doing RFP together, right? If it's an RFP, you want to be on the front end of it, right? If they're going to buy a certain way, you want to know how that's going to work, right? So that you don't get caught off guard. If they're going to use a contract, what kind of contract are they going to use, right? This is that time in Q3 where you really want to you want to know exactly how this transaction is going to go down when it's time to go down, because the last thing you want to do is get in front of them on an RFP and then not win that RFP because of something that you weren't aware of, right? And then, of course, Q4, harvest season, right? This is that time when they've got to spend all this money and they spend a lot of money really fast, right? This is the busiest time of the year for them. This is when here at TD SYNNEX that we are busy as can be because we have orders coming in constantly, right? You want to stay heavily involved during this time because like I said earlier, people are going to show up out of the woodwork from these different programs. They're going to say, "Hey, I've got 15,000 here to spend, or I got 5,000, or I got 20,000." This is a great time. If you stay involved and stay connected to them during this time, they're going to reach out to you and they're going to call you and say, "Hey, can you get me this?" Right? And you're going to win some deals just on that alone, right? And I'll tell you, this is that time where for me, I'm going to call my most strategic reseller and I'm going to say, "Hey, I need this. I got $15,000 I need to spend." If they don't answer me and they don't get back to me within the day, I'm calling the next one on the line, right? I've got to get this money spent during this time. You snooze, you lose, so to speak, right? I'm going to move right along to the next one. So if they call, you want to answer, you want to pick up that phone and answer right away because they probably got money that they need to spend. And this is also the time when they're not paying a lot of attention about what they're buying. This is a time where, I mean, I literally, no kidding, counted on about $30,000 a year that was going to come to me, that someone was going to bring to me, one of the schools or one of the program managers, and say, "Will, I can't think of anything I need. You know, can you use this money and buy something you need?" And I counted on 30 to $50,000 every year like that, right? So this is that time where you definitely want to stay as in as much contact as you possibly can, right? To be a part of that. Facilitate any contract vehicle purchases and support the bid process because there's still going to be those RFPs coming out, right? So what can we do to help, right? What can you do to help? The biggest thing I think is just understand the why behind the buy. When it comes to school districts, when they buy, they're buying because they're buying for a reason. They're mission driven, right? They're not transaction driven. So they're buying for a reason. Try to understand why they're buying it. Try to understand some of their pain points, things like that. So if you understand the why behind the buy, you can be a much better strategic partner for them, right? Know the education buying cycle that we just talked about. Because if you don't know it, you're always behind the eight ball, right? Understand the mission. Try your best when you get a meeting with the school district to figure out what it is they're doing, right? You don't have to ask specifically what is the mission, right? Because everybody have a little bit different of a mission, but at the end of the day, you're trying to find out what their pain points are. What are they dealing with? What do they need? I literally would get resellers all the time trying to get a hold of me every day, and they were just trying to sell me something. And I'll, right, be that strategic partner where when I buy something, I'm buying it from you because I know you're always looking out for me. You're not worried about the money as much. You are. I realize you are, but you don't come across that way, right? You seem to really be supporting what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to give everything I can to you because you seem to understand what I'm doing, right? And you're always going to be Johnny on the spot for me because you know I'm always going to try to buy from you every single time, right? I might even try to bend a few rules to try to make sure that you get that deal, right? Know the big buzzwords in education: student data privacy, campus security, interoperability. Those are three big buzzwords, right? Remember this: 10% of educators are innovators and 90% are replicators. Use that network of replicators. Watch the 10% that are innovators, and when they're successful, there's no other vertical out there where people talk as often and collaborate as often as school districts, right? So when you see that 10% being innovative and they're successful, everybody will jump on that wagon and follow, right? Watch for those followers, watch for those replicators. When you start to see them move, that's your time to move, right? Utilize the TD SYNNEX resources or contracts. Sometimes it's hard to even get a deal without a contract, right? The training that we have to offer, on how to think like a customer, how E-rate works, how to be strategic with E-rate. We have a ton of training services, right? We have an incredible services department that can do just about everything from do the entire job for you to implement pieces here and there that maybe you're not able to implement, right? Maybe you want to deal in an area where you don't have physical presence, right? They can help with that. Even training and PD. And then of course TD SYNNEX Capital. They've really been hitting it hard this year. They're really trying to find ways to be more strategic for school districts and make it easier for them to buy with less risk. So that's something to think about. And then remember this, when it comes to CFOs, they want to return an investment, right? It's always about the money for them no matter what. CTOs, they are always about wanting to return on their resources. That's what they're looking for, right? I don't have as many people. I need you to take something off of my plate. Do that, and you make me happy. Academic services, they want to return on learning because that's how they work, right? The kids, they get graded on how well the kids' grades come up. And superintendents want to return on popularity, right? They're the politician of the district. They rarely know anything about technology. And if you go to the superintendent, usually you get blackballed by the IT director. They hate that, right? But do know this, a lot of times you're going to be in a room nowadays with CTOs and academic services person because they work together closer than they ever have in the past. So just kind of know that when you're in that room, every reseller seems to really enjoy. Our contracts, we just talked about that. The catalog contracts are big. Grant Station, I kind of mentioned the grants earlier. Lisa Work runs our grant station, but it's an opportunity for you to find some money for a school so that they can procure from you. Our Diversity Alliance program that Randy Finley runs, it's a great program for if you have diverse status and you're not familiar with the Diversity Alliance program. I highly encourage you to let us know so that we can get you information on that because it can be a major advantage to you. And of course, our E-Rate Resource Center, it's a site that we have now that it's all about, how E-Rate works. It has everything from training in there, our vendor resources, USAC resources, sample forms, you name it, a E-rate checklist, how to navigate that space, how to build a strategy around it. So we have all of those things as well that we can utilize or that you can utilize to build more business. And then last but not least, TD SYNNEX Public Sector is a very large unit, right? And we also work with all of the rest of TD SYNNEX. So ServiceSolve, plays a huge part in what we do. TD SYNNEX Capital, we kind of talked about that a little bit about that, getting creative financially, even down to having tools to help you, like our Amplify program. If you do an E-rate deal and you're having to do a service provider invoicing on it, rather than you having to sit on that money forever waiting for it to come in, you can use Amplify and they can extend those terms for you so that you're not having to use up all your money, right? And then, of course, all the other solves that play into it, from Visual Solve and our cyber services, and all the other solves that TD SYNNEX has, all the vendor management teams and things like that that can kind of help you grow your business and help you expand your business. So, with that said, that is all I have today. I really do appreciate everybody taking the time to join our webinar. And if you have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to us at education@tdsynnex.com. And Felicia, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Well, you took my whole ending there. That wraps up today's session. Thank you for joining us for the TD SYNNEX Public Sector Spotlight Series. We hope you found this discussion valuable. A special thank you to you, Will, for sharing your expertise and for your time and commitment today. And again, that email is education@tdsynnex.com if you have any follow-up questions or want to reach out. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.